Welcome to the fourth and sadly the final of our weekly summaries for William Wordsworth Poetry, People and Place. I'm very pleased, as you'll see, we've got a bonus here today because we've been joined by Kate Ingle, who introduced you all to the Rock of Names during the course of the week. I'm again joined by Sally Bushell, who's feeling a lot better, I think, than last week. Still maybe coughing a little bit, and again by Frank Pearson. So thank you all for coming. Just to update you on Phil's health as well, he's feeling much better too. He's behind the camera, so we're all getting back ready for the new term, which for us will begin quite soon. So we've had a very exciting week this week. We've been essentially in Grasmere and around. Professor Sharon Ruston took us around Dove Cottage. Kate showed us the Rock of Names. We've obviously been particularly focusing on Dorothy's writings. We've examined letters and journals. We've given you the chance to compare some pieces of writing and to compare William and Dorothy's writing too. And once again, we've really enjoyed reading all your comments. So thanks so much for sticking with us through the 4 weeks and for engaging with the course and contributing so energetically to it. We really appreciate it. So Frank's going to be asking the questions again. So I'll hand over to you now, Frank.
Well, thank you, Simon. I think the dominant question that would come from this week is the relationship between Dorothy and William. I think this has already been mentioned over the previous units, but this one, clearly it comes to the fore with Dorothy's writing. And of course, Dorothy has only relatively recently, been published compared to Wordsworth. So there is quite an interesting sort of exploration of the relationship between Dorothy and William, and the influence one had on the other, and so on. So, Kate, do you want to give us some background on Dorothy and William?
This issue has been controversial for a long time, and I think it is to do with the fact she is the sister of a very famous published poet. She doesn't publish as much. She does publish one narrative of George and Sarah Green, which she publishes anonymously. So there's this particular thing about Dorothy not quite getting the recognition, or people feeling she's not quite getting the recognition. And critically, this has also been the case that the siblings have also always been put or played off against one another. And so if you think back to the early 19th century, Dorothy's journals weren't read. They weren't particularly valued for themselves. They were seen as kind of good material to mine to find out what Wordsworth was doing. Earlier critics felt that because Dorothy wasn't conforming to a model that William was using and Coleridge, that she wasn't writing about nature and then reflecting back with the imagination or the sublime, that there wasn't anything there or there was no consciousness, and they really went to town on that. And then in the 80s, there is a massive rediscovery or critical recovery of female writers in this period. And with that, Dorothy comes to the fore, especially because she's the sister of kind of one of the canonical poets of what we call the Big Six. However, so on the one hand, Dorothy, we get to see all of her writing, but on the other hand, people start asking questions about William and about whether he's appropriating her material, whether he is, whether he stopped her own ambition from writing because she's kind of devoted herself to him. So there has been this very stark opposition, and now there's a bit more of a kind of corrective to that stance that sees them as they both feed out of one another, they both influence one another, they discuss so many phrases together and then both use those phrases in their writing, and it also comes out of a lot. There's been a movement towards thinking about the family writing together and families in general in this period writing and publishing. I mean, one of the kind of starkest examples of that is if you think of children's literature, you'd have a whole family in the production process. You'd have a couple of sisters writing the content, you might have a brother drawing or engraving, and then that might be sent to a family publisher as a friend. So so it's certainly kind of come out of this bigger movement towards thinking about family networks.
Sibling relationships. So Kate's PhD is on sort of sibling relationships to some extent, isn't it? And with that's why you know such about it. You got the Newlyn biography there as well.
Yes.
So I think you mentioned that on the site, but maybe just flag that up to people.
It is an exceptional book. It's really, really good, and it's the first kind of joint biography of the two.
So Lucy Newlyn is a fantastic critic, and it's called William and Dorothy, All in Each Other.
I don't know if you'll be able to see that.
Tempting to open that. So we would highly recommend that. I mean, I think the other thing to it's another of those cases where you kind of have a bit of a, I don't know if it's a clash, but where you're retrospectively applying positions, so it's problematic for that. You've got feminists saying you're taking the hard line, feeling that Dorothy's unfairly treated, but then when you set that off against biographical fact or the status of women in the 19th century, and people have been talking, I've seen this looking last night on the site, actually, William did save Dorothy, unquestionably. He went back, they'd been children together, separated in later childhood, and he kind of sought her out and saved her from a life of, being an old lady's companion probably, or drudgery. So I think it's really difficult, because Dorothy's own self-presentation, I mean, she is totally devoted to him, and she feels that sense of gratitude massively, and the freedom that she's given. It's kind of mixed up, isn't it? It's hard to...
It is very complex, isn't it? And I mean, obviously, one of the things I think it obviously highlights for us are the limitations and the restrictions on women's roles in that period. There are a number of great women writers who are published at the time: Charlotte Smith, Anna Letitia Barbauld, I pronounce it, some people go for Barbeau, but they have to work in very constricted ways, and Barbauld's own career is brought to an end by a harsh review. She stops writing in effect as a result of that, and that is a very gender specific review. So she is attacked for being a woman writing, and particularly writing about public affairs. So I think it does, highlights the relationship for us, highlights the different gender roles that were available at the time. But I don't think that should, as you say, give us a misleading sense of Dorothy's own position. I mean, there's nothing really in the journals to suggest unhappiness or resentment. I mean, she seems to very much enjoy her life. There's a strong degree of freedom actually for her that wouldn't be available to lots of women. It's worth remembering as well, she is very friendly with the rest of the circle. So it's not just her and William, as you show in your rock of names. It's her and Coleridge and Mary. William's wife is a good friend of hers initially. So I think she is essentially pretty happy in this place that she is. I mean, I just wanted to say I was lucky enough on Monday to be up in the Jerwood Centre, and we were looking at MSJJ, which people might remember from week one, because it has in it the opening lines of the prelude. Was it for this? But of course it also has in it her passage about the daffodils from Ullswater's. You have both of those in this very modest looking book, two in their lifetime unpublished pieces of writing, but they're sitting together in the single volume. I mean, for me that seems like a really good symbol of the relationship.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Incredible. And to move on, Sally, one of the topics that again very clearly has affected many of the students and us, of course, is the letter, the concept of the letter, and the concept of the journal. So we've got Dorothy's fantastic journal. We've also got this amazing collection of letters that are fantastic in their own right. They're not just notes or scrambled emails. These are pieces of literature too, I feel. So could you tell us something about the place of the journal and letter writing within literature as a whole?
Yeah, so I mean, again, I suppose we've got sort of gendered forms and collaborative forms. So the letter for Dorothy and William, very much a collaborative form. They're often writing it together. They're often writing a letter over an extended period. Quite often a letter, Dorothy will write a chunk of it, and then William takes it up the next day. They write it over 3 or 4 days. I mean, the letter's a really interesting form, because for us it's almost dying out now, supplanted by email. But we still ourselves, remember letters, and on the site, I don't know if we've had it this year, but I remember last year people talking about the old airmail letters that you used to have to stick the corners down. I used to do that. I went to boarding school, and I actually hate those things because it brings it all back. Writing my weekly letter home, which was always like, how am I going to fill up the extra foot of those airmail letters? But so letters are really interesting because we still connect to them. But actually, again, as people were saying on the site, what a letter means to them is so different from what it means to us, because it is their only way of keeping in touch. And for William and Dorothy, it reminds us that they have chosen to live in a very remote part of the country, unfashionably. They're way out of any of those fashionable centres, Bath or London or Bristol, and they really need those letters. And again, Dorothy's journals, the number of times that that's what she spends her whole time doing. When William's away, all she's doing is walk to Ambleside, no post, trudges back, sadly, So just even that, the extent to which not just letter writing, but getting the post, is a big event. It's quite striking.
I thought it was great. I think it was Samuel Richardson, a quote of his, so a novelist, as we all know, of the 18th century, who wrote his novels in letter form. And he has one of his key characters, amazing villainous character, of course, Lovelace in Clarissa. And he said he loves letter writing because it's like letter writing is writing to the moment. It's the nearest we have to speech, and so he conveys that immediacy. And again, we're back to this spontaneous business again. And he's just, this is great. I'm writing as I'm thinking, as I'm talking to you. So
freedom
it's a really interesting form.
There's also a link with sort of the issues we've explored with manuscript culture. So as you say, there have been some fascinating discussions from people about the different way they value emails from letters. But obviously, in most cases, I guess there's a period where people were typing letters. The letter is handwritten. And you're getting this kind of object which is somehow part of the hand that has written it too. So there's a sort of personality, isn't there, to letters? Though I fear for anyone who gets letters from me because my handwriting is so bad.
Well, it's really interesting you mentioned handwriting because it has come up about how it's a draft letter. There's a draft letter of the Grasmere letter, and why, if paper's so expensive, why are they writing a draft letter? And part of it, I think, is to make sure they use up all the space for the postage, but also because these will be kept, and there's a sense that this is an object that will be kept to make it easy for the recipient to read. And there's a great quote by Charles Lamb when he's talking about his sister writing. And he talks about how many foul copy firsts she gets through, and how she goes through kind of having to rewrite them because she can't bear to send them in a messy form.
So there's also, that is a really interesting point as well, of course, about many famous writers where we have the whole body of letters because they've sent them and the other person has. I always wonder about that. Have they just instinctively recognise this is a great letter, or do they keep all their letters? I don't know.
And so I was just thinking about the journal as well. We were talking about the idea of the journal, and again Dorothy's role in producing this amazing journal.
There's lots of those sort of almost secondary literary forms in the period. You've got the journal, you've got the commonplace book, which I think is a really interesting form. Just looking at that at the moment, which is often quite masculine. So men, Wordsworth has a commonplace book. Most of the great writers do, where they just write quotations down or the odd line or something that struck them, and you get this sort of mosaic, very interesting object.
Ideas sometimes.
Exactly. Kind of a jottings, I suppose. So you have a commonplace book, which is usually male, and it is gendered to some extent. So it is women who usually write journals. And again, a bit like what you were just saying, Kate, about or you, Frank, about the immediacy, the now. So Dorothy's journal, it has different temporalities, and sometimes she writes up reflecting over a few days, but she also very much has a now of writing, or fitting it in between tasks. So journals are gendered form in part because you can pick it up and put it down. You're cooking, and then you whilst it's cooking, you write a bit of the journal, and then So that is quite interesting in terms of gender and time. The journal as a gendered form.
I think there's also there's encouragement in this period that connects journal writing and natural observations of the natural world to kind of dissenting education, which links. So there was at the time there was a growing influence or growing debate about recording natural observations about the world as being part of the world that God created, and there's a link between Dorothy when she's in when she grows up in Halifax with her aunt and her uncle is connected to the Warrington Academy, which is a big dissenting academy at the time for women, encouraging women to write journals, and also is linked to Anna Letitia Barbauld as well.
Yeah.
You know, she's very much connected to it.
Did her father run it? Am I remember that correctly? He was a teacher there. Yeah.
I think so.
But again, it's that sense of what are women allowed to do.
Yeah.
You know, it's an acceptable form of writing.
Yeah.
It's not okay for Anna Letitia Barbauld to attack politics,
No.
but it's fine for her to, you know, dabble in a little nice picturesque scene or write in her journal.
Yeah.
Great. And the third topic is the arrival of William and Dorothy at Grasmere, which of course comes out of letters. Dorothy's journal, Grasmere journal, begins shortly after they've arrived. And of course we've looked at it this week with the poem Home at Grasmere. So, you know, there's quite an interesting sort of world of texts again here. So we've covered the relationship, and we've covered journal writing and letter writing, and now we're back into the poetry, embedded as it were within these other forms of literature. So we were thinking, you know, many of the students have been moved by the poem, found it interesting to compare it with the letter. So Sally, could you just take us into Home at Grasmere?
Home at Grasmere. So Home at Grasmere is another of those poems that owes a lot to Cornell, actually, because Cornell, the Cornell volume, Cornell series, presented it as a text, whereas of course it doesn't really exist as a text in inverted commas. You know, it's not published at all. So it's kind of very overlooked really until they brought it to attention really in the 70s. It is. I think it's a really interesting poem because it's almost at two levels, and at one level you've got this kind of celebration of coming back to Grasmere, home at Grasmere, but for Wordsworth, a decision to return, big decision to return to his place of birth. So it's kind of, at one level, at surface level, it's joyful, the celebration of that place, but it's also kind of fraught throughout with his anxieties about what that means. And if I've come here to write and to be the great poet of place, can I do it? And so it's just fabulous because the tensions between those two things are really, really good, I think.
Fantastic. Great. I agree. It's a wonderful poem, isn't it? And Simon, many of the students have been taken by, as we all are ourselves again, by the actual approach to Grasmere, and not just the single walk that they did, but the whole way that Wordsworth and Dorothy and Coleridge and Hazlitt and Rousseau, as we've been talking about, you know, all these great writers and great walkers, and this idea of composition and experience and so on. So could you open up a bit there about Wordsworth, the walker, the writer?
Absolutely. Well, as you say, you know, Home at Grasmere gives us one of those great journeys, the majority of which is a pedestrian journey that becomes clearly a sort of symbolic walk to a place of home, as Sally was saying, with a strong sense of arrival, almost a sense of having to earn it through struggling through those difficult conditions, you know, perhaps taking us all the way back to you know, Homer and the Odyssey, and the sense of the journey back home there again, which that poem is structured around. So we've got that single example there. As you say, for the Romantics, walking is absolutely crucial to their practice, I think. You know, both in symbolic terms and then, as we know, in practical terms. So Wordsworth used to like to compose walking, both the long kind of excursive, but then the more confined walking to and fro.
Yeah.
As you say, that's inherited from Rousseau and the reveries of the solitary walker. I mean, my own research at the moment, as you know, is about people walking up mountains, and what links that has with their own identity of poets. You know, why do you need to go up a mountain to prove that you are a poet? Is the kind of question I'm working on, and something they took very seriously. So. You know, even someone like Keats, who we think of as a Cockney poet, climbs Ben Nevis to kind of prove that he can be a poet. So we know, Wordsworth climbs many hills, including getting to the top of Helvellyn when he's 70, which is pretty impressive. Coleridge makes some pioneering climbs. So it's very much part of literary culture.
Yeah. But again, I mean, it's again another of those sort of turning points for Romanticism, where Romanticism connects to the modern, isn't it? Where prior to that, and it's a politicized act. You choose to walk. You shouldn't choose to walk if you're rich. You'd be in a carriage. You know, if you're walking, it's because you're poor. And so Wordsworth and Coleridge making a kind of political and democratic point as well, very much. And Wordsworth walking right through France and coming back through Germany during the Revolution to join in, and be part of that. So walking is quite a politicised act. And then as Simon's research is sort of looking into, walking for pleasure being a bizarre concept. It was really interesting. So I've been in China. I was in China for 5 weeks earlier in the year. And when we went to the Great Wall, we passed this amazing landscape of hills, fabulous Chinese hills, very heavily wooded. And so I said to the guide, "Can you walk these hills? Are there paths up it?" And he said, "No." And I said, "But it would be it's fantastic landscape. Why doesn't any?" And he said, "We don't really do that in China." And that was really striking to me. So I said to him, if that was in England, there would be routes all over that. That's today. I thought, but it was really striking because I thought, gosh, walking is so much part of our culture and heritage. But actually, it does come from Romanticism.
Yes. Do you want to add anything about Dorothy's walking?
I mean, I think Dorothy was quite unusual in that she was a woman who was walking for so long, and again, I mean, as Sally says, there's kind of acceptable forms of writing, there's also acceptable forms of walking in a way. So Dorothy was, it was fine for her to go on a short walk, but for her to undertake the kind of walk she did with William, her aunt has sent her a letter telling her, it's unladylike, you shouldn't be doing this, and ticking her off for going on her long rambles, as it's referred to in the letter, which is, it's a great way of Dorothy kind of testing those boundaries, and
like in Pride and Prejudice when she comes with the dirty petticoat, she's told off, doesn't she, having walked across the fields.
It's interesting, William celebrates women walking, doesn't he? And he, I'm thinking particularly of a poem he writes about a woman who's climbed to the top of Helvellyn, and he celebrates the experience that she has. So again, he's a more radical figure in terms of gender politics, I think, than he's sometimes given credit for. I just wanted to make a little link back to Homer Grasmere and walking. So I was up, as I mentioned earlier in the week on Monday, in the Lake District. One of the things I do is lead Wordsworth walks for various groups, and we went to Luffrigg Terrace, which I'm sure is a path that many of you will know, and I've been up there with all of you in the past, just above Grasmere. And if you're looking for a walk near Grasmere, that is a fantastic walk to do, Luffrigg Terrace, and that's where Wordsworth begins Homer Grasmere. With this looking down from Luffrigg Terrace onto Grasmere. So if there's anyone out there who's looking to create a kind of Wordsworthian experience in the landscape, then get yourselves a copy of Homer Grasmere, head to Luffrigg Terrace and read the opening 40 or 50 lines.
It's a fabulous view.
It's very powerful experience, powerful experience, and really emphasises the sense of how important Grasmere was to him. Okay, well, I think we're out of time. I mean, we could keep going, but obviously with the four of us, we've very much enjoyed our conversation. As you can see, we could keep going, but sadly, we have now come to the end of our 4 weeks. This doesn't necessarily need to be the end of your learning with Lancaster. We've got another MOOC starting next month, led by Sharon Ruston, who of course has been showing us around Dove Cottage today. Many of the mentors are involved in that course. Are you
I am,
mentoring that one? Are you doing that one,
I'm
Kate?
not.
No? I think
Andrew
I'm
is
not a
with
scientist.
No, Andrew Lacey is too.
Yeah.
I've signed up to do that course, very much looking forward to it. As I think it's called Humphrey Davy, Literature, Laughing Gas and the Lamb.
The Lamb.
Yeah,
Yes,
so,
yes.
so lots of L's there. So it just remains for me to thank today's participants again, to thank particularly the mentors, the two Andrews as well as Frank and Kate for all their excellent work through the course. Obviously thanks to Sally and to Sharon and to the team behind the camera who you can't see there, Phil and the rest of his team who looked after us with the technology as well on the platform. So once again, thank you, and by thanking you all for your contributions to the course. As we said, we've very much enjoyed it, and we look forward hopefully to seeing you again, if not in Grasmith's Happy Vale, then perhaps in some online format.